Okay, everyone, let's get started. First of all, welcome to this Post-Globalization Movement Symposium. I am Shin, a faculty member at Rady School of Management in University of California, San Diego. This symposium is co-hosted by the Institute for Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation at Rady School in UC San Diego and Tijuana EDC. Before we begin, I would like to recognize Tijuana EDC for the sponsorship for this symposium. In particular, special thanks to Edna Patricia Hernandez, CEO of Tijuana EDC, as well as Carlos Jaramillo, head of the board, Tijuana EDC. Thank you, Patty and Carlos, again for your support. The details agenda for the symposium is in the chat box. Let me give you a broad overview of this symposium. At the Institute of Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation, we initiated this industry research project related to the post-globalization movement last fall. We had a phase 1 post-globalization movement symposium last fall to report out our findings. In phase 1, we looked at different countries in the global context, including China, India, US, and Mexico, and then identified the potential and opportunity of Mexico. To follow up, we kicked off our phase 2 post-globalization movement project in January. And this is our phase 2 post-globalization movement symposium focusing on Mexico, right? We are delighted to have you all. In this symposium, we have keynote speech followed by our student presentation and both private sector industry panel as well as public sector panel discussions. This is a unique opportunity to bring both the private sector and the public sector together for collaboration to unlock the immense opportunity in US and Mexico value chain development, potentially extending it to the whole Pacific Rim, including Asia and Latin America. So before we jump on, 2 quick announcements on logistics. During this symposium, if you have any questions, please use your questions or chat box to type your questions. We will then parse your questions to the panelists and speakers. And second, the last component of this symposium is the roundtable discussions. There are 7 distinct roundtable topics. Those are in the chat box. You can see those topics and facilitator information as well. Please think about which roundtable topic that you want to join, which will start about 5:40 p.m. Okay. With that, let's go move on to our first item, which is Rady School's Associate Dean Anna Mill will give a welcome remark.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the symposium. It's a pleasure to see so many participants and so many distinguished speakers and participants. On behalf of the Rady School and UC San Diego, welcome and thank you for coming to this really impressive gathering. To those of you who don't know UC San Diego well, UC San Diego is one of the top research universities in the world. It's often ranked in the top 10. If you only look at public universities, it's often in the top 5. And it's been and continues to be, and its goal is to be a huge source of knowledge and economic growth for the area. And as part of that, in partnering with the local industry, UC San Diego decided that they need to have a good business school because otherwise they have talent leaving to the East Coast to good business schools and they don't always come back. And so in partnership with the local business community, the UC San Diego started the Rady School of Management in around 2003, matriculating our first class in 2005. So we're a young school. Several of our programs are already ranked in the top in the world. Which is sort of a really impressive achievement for a young school in a relatively young university. And a lot of this is thanks to the community. And since the roots of the Rady School are in collaborations with the community, and especially with the local business community, it's not surprising that events like this happen. And a particular promising area of collaboration has to do with a cross-border cross-border initiatives, I would say, or opportunities that align. And one such kind of low-hanging fruit where there's easily win-win collaborations is around supply chain. And so we're super excited to have the Supply Chain Institute organize events like this that create industry, academia, and industry student collaborations. Special thanks to the Institute and the people who run it. Special thanks to the Tijuana EDC for helping sponsor this event. And Special thanks to Dr. Luz Maria de la Moran for participating and endorsing this event, making it even more official from our Mexican counterparts. And so I wish everybody, you didn't come to hear me, I wish you a very productive afternoon, and please don't hesitate to approach us if you have any ideas of ways we can continue to collaborate and create value. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Anne. Next, we'll move on to Helen, who is the chair for the Supply Chain Institute at Rady School.
ISEI stands for Institute for Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation. Thought leadership in value chain innovation and supply chain excellence really defines who we are. Our chair emeritus, also the founder of ISEI, Jimmy Ancusaria, had the vision to bridge gaps between academia and the industry. In the past few years, ISEI built a global community of board of advisors, industry executives, member companies, and next generation leaders, together with faculties and students at UC San Diego. We invest resources in industry research, community development, and talent incubation for the global value supply chains. Those of us who have experienced the globalization and now post-globalization understand how complex, dynamic, and impactful the system could be. COVID has elevated the supply chain to the private sector's boardrooms and the White House for the public sectors. Whether your company is an upstream raw material supplier or a downstream product company, or midstream assembly manufacturing, or connectors like logistic companies or service providers, you are an essential part of the global system. You're very welcome to join our community. ISEI was founded at the UC San Diego, one of the best research universities. To create the win-win for industry and our university, we are very excited to announce the research and learning platform to host 8 to 10 events at each year. Our board of advisors partner with Dr. Shin, faculties, and student leaders of the university to orchestrate those events. Today's PGM Symposium officially launched the program with your support and participation. We are honored to celebrate this special moment with you. We have so many ideas to share with you. Please share your vote for future topics through the poll question. Looking forward, Banesh and Monique will organize an event about cross-border in April. Mark Meso will lead an event on technology in September. In November, Jimmy Ancusaria plans to have our grand annual forum in person, and Tom Derry will lead a panel to discuss the industry outlook and the forecast. Please follow us on the LinkedIn page, and the link is posted on the chat box for more updates. We look forward to seeing you at future events. Lastly, on behalf of ISEI and the PGM team, I would like to recognize our regional leaders from automobile, aerospace, medical, and electronic industry. Kudos to Sergio from Honeywell, Javier from FEMIA, Marco from Hissan, Eric from Flex, Ruben from Toyota, and Bijan and Fernanda from Collins Aerospace. You have opportunities to interact with most of them at the roundtable discussion today. The Cross-Border Leadership Committee made today's event possible, and it will continuously support ISEI on future research projects and building a cross-border community around the UC San Diego. Today, we have an incredible agenda, fantastic speakers, and a very knowledgeable audience. Welcome to the PGM Symposium. We appreciate your trust, friendship, and support. Thank you.
Here's 30 years of supply chain history in the global era on one slide. I'm pretty proud of my one slide here. If you go back to 1989, we had a seminal event of the fall of the Berlin Wall, German reunification, creating, again, the largest single country market in Europe, happened in 1990, all the way up to China acceding to the WTO in 2001, and Poland, a former Eastern European satellite of the USSR, joining the EU in 2004. We had the Great Recession in 2008. And then we began to move into, I would argue, a slightly different era in terms of understanding the movement towards globalization. So let me just give you a sense of that. I would argue that from 1989 to 2009, we had an unusual, or as I say here, anomalous 2-decade period of broad consensus on the benefits of free trade in an era where we lacked geopolitical rivalries, right? The USSR had collapsed. There was no more Cold War. The EU was integrating, right? The EU, we had the launch of the euro in 1999. The WTO replaced the GATT. We had NAFTA here in North America back in 1994. There was a broad consensus on the benefits of free trade and a lot of global movement, both governmental and private industry movement towards implementing an era of free trade. And yet, if we look at the last 10 years, some of the events that I've highlighted here, in 2010, China imposed export quotas on rare earth minerals. Now, many of you will probably be aware that China has a de facto monopoly in the supply of rare earth minerals, which are used in many of our high-tech products. They're used in, our laptops, our smartphones, our electric vehicles. And China was unhappy with prices. And so they imposed export quotas to try to improve prices for rare earth minerals. We had the very famous now Fukushima earthquake and tsunami back in 2011. China lost its case before the WTO on rare earth quotas back in 2014. We had the seminal Brexit vote in June of 2016, in which the British people expressed their discomfort and discontent with the impacts of globalization on their particular country. If you go back for a minute, I just point out that in 1992, China's country GDP was $427 billion. But by 2017, it was 30 times greater, at over 12 trillion. And today it's approaching the US. We're at about 20 and $21 trillion in the United States, and China's just behind us at 17 or $18 trillion today. And that's in nominal terms. If you want to track purchasing power parity, actually China is the world's largest economy and has been for some time. In 2018, just to pick one example, the Trump administration imposed the Section 232 tariffs on aluminum and steel. They were the first tariffs imposed for national security reasons. That was the reason expressed by the administration back in 2018. We had softwood lumber tariffs against Canada in 2017, and we had product-specific tariffs after that. So, but 2018 was sort of the key kicking off point. I would argue that 2018, because of the Trump administration's action, made it okay for countries to put tariffs back in their toolkit. Now, one other way of expressing that is the Trump administration allowed weaponization of tariffs as part of global relationships. And I point to what's happened in 2019 when, in reaction to some court decisions in the Republic of Korea, Japan imposed export restrictions on some key materials required for the manufacture of semiconductors and smartphone screens and other screens. And as you may know, Japan happens to hold a de facto monopoly on photoresists and other materials that are absolutely crucial for the manufacture of smart screens and semiconductors. And by imposing these export quotas, they were dealing with a political issue. So Korea and Japan have had an ongoing dispute going back to actually the early part of the 20th century, but particularly during the World War II era, around conscription of labor and the issue of so-called comfort women. Japan considers this issue settled. The Republic of Korea does not. Republic of Korea is pressing its claims, and Japan responding to a purely political dispute imposed economic sanctions. So I would argue in this last 10-year period of time, we've seen some seminal events where that 20-year period of broad consensus on the benefits of free trade have evolved into a period where we have some concerns about the fragility of global supply chains. The Fukushima event was a very good example around that. And we also have some countries sort of trying to impose their will, if you will, around trying to restructure global trade around their particular preferred outcomes and consequences. So to summarize, if we want to talk about the 30-year period, back in 2004, Business Week had this cover story, the China price. And as you can see here, it says, cut your price by at least 30% or lose your customers. Now, I would argue that's a very good dramatic example of what we see here as the global single source strategy. So the last 30 years have been largely, especially the first 20 of the 30 years, have been largely focused on consolidating our spend volume, finding a low-cost country, leveraging our spend volume with a single global supplier, and getting the most COGS benefit, if you will, cost of goods sold benefit that we could from that low-cost supplier. I would argue today we're moving into a global +1 era where China is not a country that can be ignored for many reasons. It has a very advanced infrastructure. It's got very advanced manufacturing capability. And China and the rest of Asia, or especially East Asia, is the emerging economic center of the world economy for the 21st century. So no one can afford to avoid them. So global +1, meaning China maybe plus another country, makes sense, but not always China. And I will tell you that private firms in China are beginning to stand up facilities outside of China in places like Vietnam and Malaysia, because they find that being a China-based company isn't the best situation for their firm in terms of their ability to compete. So there's definitely some flexibility around that. Now, ultimately, we may move towards some of these two other strategies, which are mentioned at the bottom of the slide, local for local and region for region. I believe we are headed in that direction, but I don't think we're there yet. We were clearly in the global single source quadrant, where I think we're now in the global +1 quadrant, and I think the future portends local for local and then eventually region for region. Now, I would argue that this is because the old paradigm has shifted to a new paradigm. And I'm not alone in this. That's why I put some footnotes in here. I've got some friends in both in corporate America and in academia who would support, I think, my description, although this characterization is purely my own. The old paradigm was focused on cost. It was focused on assurance of supply. We were rationalizing our supply base, which meant we had, the low-cost country, and we were trying to put all of our spend with that one particular supplier. It was a supply focus. It was about, let's fix the supply part of our business. And it was operating in an era when we had a geopolitical consensus around the benefits of free trade for every country, right? Now, I would argue, and these points line up deliberately, we are moving in an era where it's not a focus on cost as much as it should be, arguably, a focus on free cash flow. And free cash flow, for those of you who understand, balance sheets and finances, free cash flow brings in the working capital elements of creating value. So cost is cost. Cost is clear. In a P&L statement, everyone can understand cost and COGS. But we often ignored some of the other elements of working capital and other costs, inventory obsolescence that had to be written off on the balance sheet. So free cash flow may be the metric going forward. Assurance of supply, I think, gives way to speed and agility, or as other people sometimes term it, velocity. And you'll see why I mention that in a moment. A rationalized supply base, clearly in the era of the COVID pandemic, we understand, even consumers understand today, the disruption risk that exists. And I would argue that maybe we didn't price in, while we were seeking cost advantages, we didn't price in the implicit cost or the hidden cost of disruption risk as part of the cost benefits that we were realizing when we were seeking the low-cost supplier. I would argue that we're moving from a supply focus to a demand focus. In 2020, we've seen industries that have benefited from the pandemic, industries in the United States, particularly higher education and healthcare, have suffered, right, as a result of the pandemic. The ability to respond to changing consumer preferences and demands is critically important in supply chain. And I think we're moving from an era of, hey, let's get the supply part of the business correct, and saving that money and the bottom line benefits that were down to the bottom of the balance of the P&L from that, to a demand focus, which is focused on things like we could lose market share. You know, we could lose customers permanently. And finally, and this is fairly obvious, I think we're in an era, if geopolitical conflict overstates it, we're certainly in an era of geopolitical rivalry. And so the consensus around the benefits of free trade, I think, are eroding. This, I would argue, is the context for the Biden administration's executive order on February 24th, just under a month ago. It focused on 4 industries. I think you're probably all familiar with this: large capacity electric batteries, active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs, semiconductors, and rare earth minerals. And President Biden, in introducing the executive order and the ceremony around that, he made these particular remarks. We shouldn't have to rely on a foreign country, especially one that doesn't share our interests or values, in order to protect and provide our people during a national emergency. Well, many of us could have advised any of the previous presidents about the risks associated with the kind of the globalization of the supply chain around a single supplier before now, but our government officials clearly are aware of the risks today. And the sectors that have been highlighted by the administration on the left here are quite interesting. EVs are the future, arguably, of personal transportation, and large capacity electric batteries are going to be the critical technology to enable that. I don't know if many consumers appreciated that 80% of our active pharmaceutical ingredients in the medicines we consume today are sourced from China, and therefore are arguably subject to being cut off for reasons that that maybe has to do with geopolitical conditions. About 90% of our rare earth minerals are sourced from China today, and that has nothing to do with some geographic reality. I mean, rare earth minerals are found all over the globe, but China is willing to mine for them. And the US, we're not mining for these minerals, and other countries, we're not mining for these minerals. So there are trade-offs between decisions around quality of life and environmental protection and potential economic and national security vulnerabilities. So I'm just pointing that out. Now, it's interesting that the world's largest contract manufacturer, Foxconn, formerly known as Han High Precision, the new chairman has made this comment: the world factory no longer exists. The world factory referring to China as the world factory. Foxconn is now working on providing 2 sets of supply chain to service the 2 markets. And I would suggest, and the reason I'm providing this thought at the beginning of this conference, is that we need to think about the evolving 2 markets. I'm not saying it's a Cold War, but I'm saying there is going to be a China-centric, Asia-centric economy, and there may be a US-centric, Western-centric economy. They do not necessarily share values, and companies like Han High have to work in both environments. I think we've seen that play out in some of the Trump administration's decisions. In the previous administration, the Biden administration has inherited some of those and is working through their thinking on those particular topics. But I think we're headed towards a bipolar world, and we may be headed towards a bi-supply chain world, where we're dealing with the requirements and exigencies of the de facto leaders of those 2 poles. Now I want to bring Mexico into the frame. So we're here to talk about Mexico particularly and how it benefits from this environment. Well, as you can see from this data from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, since the Trump administration tariffs were imposed in 2018, that's indicated by those 3 vertical dotted lines, Mexico has benefited in terms of overall imports to the United States, and China has lost market share. So there has been some swing. Production has shifted to Mexico, and purchasers, buyers would rather work with non-tariff subject countries than tariff subject countries. So it's not a massive movement at the current time, but it's a significant movement. The next chart kind of shows particularly the tariff subject products. You can see that China has lost about 1.5% of market share in general, but with goods with additional tariffs, Mexico has benefited by gaining a little over 0.5% and much more than the other countries, much more than South Korea, Taiwan, UK, or Russia. And finally, goods without additional tariffs, Mexico has lost a little bit of market share, but I would argue that Mexico, in particular, based on about 2 years worth of history, clearly is already benefiting from a movement towards the country being a preferred supplier. And that's food for thought for us during this symposium this afternoon. The global +1 scenario that we're in today, this is a summary I found from PwC. They argue that moving to a China plus Mexico, or moving from China to Mexico, could result in 23% lower costs overall. A lot of that has to do with labor, but not only labor. It's much cheaper to ship products from Mexico to the United States, for instance, and lead times are much shorter, as we all know. Mexico is an attractive alternative source if it's Mexico or another Asian country. And finally, US CFOs realize that reassessing their footprint is important. So as it turns out, a majority of chief procurement officers report to chief financial officers. So if CFOs think that readjusting our footprint matters, that matters to the CPO agenda and to the procurement teams overall. In terms of manufacturing cost overall, this is data from Statista. You can see that Mexico enjoys a cost advantage in US dollar terms over Mexico, and that should continue for a while. Longer term, the labor arbitrage game is going to be, we're going to reach an equilibrium across the globe. So there's some short-term benefits, probably the next 3 to 5 years, maybe a decade if we're lucky, in terms of Mexico. Over time, that will equalize, and it won't be the advantage anymore, but Mexico will still enjoy the advantages of proximity. So lead times, velocity, shipping costs, we'll still have the advantage there. Finally, a view towards how Mexico has progressed since the era of NAFTA and beyond. These are a few selected industry sectors. You can see that machinery and transport overall, which includes automotive and aerospace, has grown very substantially to over almost $300 billion a year from Mexico to the United States. If you break it down a little bit, transport and equipment and automotive have also kind of basically followed the same trend line. And what's interesting, if you can see the very bottom, it almost follows the x-axis of this chart. You look at integrated circuits and electronic components. It has not budged in 2 decades. I would argue that that is an argument for thinking about why isn't Mexico a prominent source of more sophisticated electronic products to the United States? And is that an opportunity for us here as we think about the symposium?
This is about China's export quota, whether that quota has anything to do with the climate regulations, or was it simply due to the disagreement in prices?
My information is that it was mostly motivated by trying to force higher prices for the commodities they were exporting.
Here's a quick look at the agenda we have planned for you today. We want to start off with a brief introduction to Project PGM and a background on post-globalization. followed by phase 2 of our research, which involves cluster and SWOT analysis and a discussion on industry dynamics that we were able to observe through the data. And finally, end with conclusion and some recommendations. So let's get started. So what is Project PGM? It is an independent study project here at Rady School of Management that aims to understand and discover supply chain trends or value chain realignment that are in motion during our current time. We go about this by following a set process for our research, starting with literature and moving on to collecting data from the industry through surveys and interviews. We speak with experts and executives to get a better understanding of the complex nature of the value chains they operate in. Followed by analysis of the data using a 5D model and also validating the data against available benchmarking numbers. We also attempt to theorize and explain patterns or relationships we find at work. And finally, make projections in the form of movement or strategy or trends. Next slide, please. So a key framework that we use as a foundation for the study is the 5D model, which was initially developed by our leads and is a great tool for us to break down data we capture. The methodology or the framework works as a guide to help us understand the subject of our research along 5 dimensions, 4 of which are environmental, top line, bottom line, hard power, and soft power. And the 5th one is time. The top line dimension is related to any business attribute that affects revenues or sales, basically a top line. Things like market size, potential for growth, etc. Bottom line is the complete opposite. It's tied to cost and which could be affected by things like labor costs, tariffs, taxes. Hard power, on the other hand, is infrastructure related and is dependent on attributes like road systems, railways, ports, logistics, access to technology. Soft power, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. It's more centered around people and culture. Things like talent, education levels, social network contribute to this dimension. As for time, we roughly use levels like short, mid, and long term, which correlate to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years time. So I'd like to also mention that we have an elaborate list of attributes for each dimension we use in the 5-dimensional model. So moving on to a quick background on post-globalization, starting with globalization itself. Among many effects of globalization and this global phenomena, most blatant to us is the lengthening of supply chains to capture cost-saving opportunities. And roughly, you can say that things started picking up at around 1990s when the NAFTA deal agreement was signed. And with most of the obvious opportunities exhausted or put to use, other global factors have started to emerge and gain prominence. Next slide, please. The most notable among them being the new trade wars, the recent trade wars, and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. These have disrupted established supply chains to a great extent and have triggered a new push towards regionalization, indicating to us an increasing focus on resilience or resistance to supply disruptions. So our research for phase 1 was really centered around 4 countries that we believed had the most impact on global economies. And so here we have a few key takeaways from phase 1. We believe the US will continue to be an innovation leader. Mexico, a midstream manufacturing hub, and China, an overall great all-round performer, and as a one-stop shop for your supply needs. And finally, India, which seems to have tremendous potential, but is sort of undone by its infrastructure and red tape. Among many of our projections, our midterm projections, which were in the range of 5 to 10 years, were centered around Mexico and India due to their potential strategic benefits with respect to their region, their respective regions. Mexico for the North American market and India for the Asian market. Both countries seem to have a solid foundation in terms of labor capacity, along with education levels and talent. And finally, an unmatched proximity advantage. So as part of phase 2, we really wanted to take a closer look at Mexico and its strengths and weaknesses. And from phase 1, we learned that the maquiladora system, along with trade policies and infrastructure, were some of Mexico's key strengths compared to the other 3 countries. But there were some concerns about clusters and upstream industry in the region. And so we knew where we had to start from for phase 2.
So in phase 2, we will be focusing on Mexico. As Abhinav mentioned, we all don't have the background of Mexico. However, we had a lot of help from different organizations such as Tijuana ADC, Mexicality ADC, and Forefronted, and we thank them for their help. In this phase, we will focus on 4 manufacturing industries that make up almost 85% of the manufacturing in Mexico, which are automotive, aerospace, medical devices, and electronics. We will also zoom into the border states since 90% of their export at these states are from manufacturing. Next, please. So first, before proceeding with the analysis, we would like to define the clusters. In simple words, clusters are networks of firms and manufacturers that are strongly connected within the production chain, creating value added together. Well-developed clusters can drive competitiveness, innovation, attract talent, and low cost. For example, the Silicon Valley has a strong cluster in microelectronics and capital venture. Boston has a strong cluster in biotechnology. So well-developed clusters can be measured by different certifications, and in our analysis, we will be looking into the FCAS certification for management excellence, and the golden tier is the top tier, followed by the silver, and then the bronze. In phase 1, cluster in Mexico has been identified as an area of concern. Mexico didn't have any cluster in the top 100, so we focused our analysis in this phase on clusters from these 4 industries. Next, please. We will have a quick look on the history of the 4 industries in Mexico. So first of all, the automotive industry started back in 1925 when Ford Motor established an assembly line in Mexico. Then in 1927, the first aerospace factory was founded in Tijuana. However, the industry started blooming later in the 2000s. The medical device industry dates back to the 1932 and also started blooming in the early 2000s. The electronic industry started in the 1980s and continues to grow since then. So from this, we can see that all 4 industries have long history in Mexico, even though they started blooming later on. Next, please. So we started our analysis by looking at the trade volume between the United States and Mexico. In 2019, Mexico was the United States' second largest supplier of good imports and the largest good trading partner, with $614.5 billion in total, with $358 billion being exported to the US from Mexico. In terms of service trading volume, the US and Mexico traded a total of $62.7 billion in 2019, with $29.8 billion being exported to the US from Mexico. A further analysis on the trade volume, we estimated that around 45% of the trade volume was derived from the US-Mexico border states. Here's a quick breakdown of the 45% over the border. First, Texas and the northeastern Mexico border states traded $104.3 billion, with the top category being in machinery and electronics. Second comes California and Baja California at $46.7 billion, with the top category being in computers and electronic products and transportation equipment. Next comes Arizona and Sonora, trading $9.3 billion, with 27% being in agricultural products. Lastly, New Mexico and Chihuahua traded approximately $1.4 billion, with the top category being in electronics. Now, based on our survey results and industry interviews, we noticed that Baja California, Chihuahua, Sonora, and Querétaro had good cluster of 4 industries. So to validate our findings, we analyzed some more data. We'll start with the aerospace industry. Mexico's major aerospace clusters are located in Baja California, Chihuahua, and Querétaro. As mentioned earlier, prior to the 2000s, there was almost no presence for the aerospace in Mexico, but by 2003, the industry started to grow as companies started moving the operation to capitalize on the maquiladora concept, which gave them access to low-cost labor and tax avoidance. As a result, they were not very much integrated within Mexico or North American supply chain. They basically would import their supply from the US and export the products back to the US. This changed after 10 to 15 years when they became more integrated within Mexico and the North American supply chain. So the aerospace industry is the 12th largest aerospace supply globally as of 2017. Mexico, in the top category, USA, France, and China were on the top of the list. 9.5 billion, Mexico has 9.5 billion in annual aerospace industry exports as of 2019. There are more than 300 companies in Mexico in 2020, and the industry is growing at an annual rate of 20%. Now, the aerospace in Mexico was named #1 in attracting foreign investments for 5 years in a row between 2010 and 2015. And the Aerospace Alliance of Baja California has a Bronze ESCA Cluster Excellence certification. Moving on to the automotive industry. The automotive has a big cluster in Mexico, mainly on the border areas and in central Mexico. So there are clusters in Baja California, Sonora, Chihuahua, and as many other states in the central area. The automotive industry is in Mexico is the 6th global producer. In this industry, China, US, and Japan are on the top of the list. The industry creates 7 major subsectors manufacturing opportunities, including aftermarket parts, electronic and hybrid vehicles. There are 3.7 million units produced in Mexico in 2020. 90% of the Mexico auto production is dedicated to export, with almost 79% going to the United States. The automotive cluster of Nuevo Leon had Golden ESCA Cluster Excellence certification. Moving to the electronic industry, we have almost 12 clusters for the electronic industries, mainly in Baja California, Sonora, Chihuahua. The electronic industry is the 2nd largest export of electronics to the United States. It is the 8th largest global producer in the globe. And in this industry, China, the US, and Germany are at the top of the list. According to the National Chamber of Electronic Manufacturers, there are approximately 100,000 companies in this industry in Mexico. Moving to the medical device industry. We have also 12 clusters, mainly in Baja California. The biggest cluster is in Baja California. Again, in the medical industry, Mexico is the 8th largest producer. And on the top, we have China, US, and Germany. There are almost $15 billion value of devices produced by Mexico. There are almost 90 companies in Baja California alone. And it's worth mentioning that 90% of all medical devices that are manufactured in Mexico are exported to the US. Baja California has a Bronze ESCA Cluster Excellence certification too. So a quick summary on the clusters. We can see that Mexico has a strong clusters of the 4 industries, and especially on the border areas. With more focus on improvement programs, Mexico can make it to the list of the top 100 clusters in the future. Next, from our research and the data we collected, we observed an overlap between the 4 industry suppliers. All 4 industries are different in terms of standards and production. However, there are similarities. For example, all 4 industries could share the same chip producer. In addition, the aerospace and automotive industry could share advanced materials such as the carbon fiber. Previously, the carbon fiber was only used for the aircraft. However, today, the automotive industry is using it more in order to improve the environmental performance of the vehicles. Medical industry, aerospace, and automotive could also share screen suppliers or graphics interface software. With the increase in automation, the gap between these industries will get smaller and smaller, and we'll see more overlap and integration in terms of technology, supply chain, and probably even in talent. It might be worthwhile for further deep dive into this overlap to find ways to utilize it to accelerate the growth of each industry.
Our team also did SWOT analysis for Mexico. Big thanks to all these industrial executives who helped answer our survey and spent a lot of time during our interviews, and thank you for your support. We team started from SWOT analysis to find out what are Mexico's advantages and disadvantages, and compared that to what the main four industries needs and their preferences in terms of hard power, soft power, bottom line, and top line. Find the gap and see what Mexico should do to close the gap. In our research survey, we asked about the rating of the factors from different dimensions. For each factor, we offered 3 options: strength, weakness, or indifferent. Based on the data, we got this spider graph and show us what the strengths and weakness that Mexico has. The number here equals to how many votes. For example, let's see the infrastructure and the logistics from the hard power. As we found from our PGM phase 1, infrastructure is identified as a strength of Mexico. Our survey data did verify that infrastructure is one of the strengths. However, compared to the other strengths, infrastructure has less votes and not strong compared to the other strengths. Instead, among all the weaknesses, as you can see from the yellow line, infrastructure is a strong weakness, which means there is big room for Mexico to improve its infrastructure and logistics. Combine the data we received from the survey with the information we got from our interviews. Here is a summary. The top mentioned strengths from our survey and interviews are the proximity to customer, potential for growth, availability of both skilled labor and critical talent. The most mentioned weaknesses are mainly from the hard power side, including the government program and policies, ESG compliance, and infrastructure and logistics. The opportunities that Mexico can take advantage of also include reliability, such as on-time delivery, consistency and stability, product quality, and reputation. The threats that could negatively affect Mexico compared to the competitors include the ease of business and IP protection. The next step we did is to figure out what the industries value the most in terms of the hard power, soft power, top line, and bottom line. According to the survey and interview data, we made the spider graphs and find that the top mentioned attributes of each dimension for each industry. The number here equals to the ranking, means the middle part of the graph is more important than the outside. We find some similarities among the 4 industries. For example, the hard power, all the 4 industries vote infrastructure and logistics as the most important factor to their business. As to the soft power, culture, and access to talent are important to all the industries. In terms of top line, the result is very consistent that product quality and proximity to customer are the most important factors. With respect to the bottom line, tariff and incentives and supplier proximity are the most valuable. To summarize, it's interesting to find out that even though the 4 industries have different preferences, they have the common needs in general. Now we know what the needs from the major industries, and we know what the Mexico's advantages and disadvantages from our SWOT analysis. We compare them and get to the conclusion that in terms of soft power and top line, Mexico is perfectly matched with what the industries need. However, as to the hard power and bottom line, there are gaps in infrastructure and logistics and supplier proximity. How to close the gap? Mexico should make use of its advantage of proximity to the customers and product quality to grow and attract more investment. As to the weakness and threats, the government specifically needs to improve the policies or provide offset programs. Make business easier, such as lowering rates and invest more in the infrastructure and logistics. For example, build new ports to support the movement of suppliers. In addition, actions to assist suppliers to move to the Mexico or closer are also highly recommended. Next, I will pass on to Avinav to talk more about dynamics.
Right. Thank you, Nikki. So during the course of our study, we were able to discover a few patterns and relationships based on the data which we had captured. With respect to value chain positioning, Mexico indeed seems to be more of a midstream manufacturing hub based on its strategic benefits. And the US really is the end destination for most goods produced in Mexico. But it would seem that most of the raw material comes from either the US or China. Here's a closer look at the sourcing numbers. Next slide, please. So from our research participants, we were able to discover that the average domestic spending is around 20% compared to a massive 80% international or overseas. From this 80%, we see that about 40% comes from the US and about 20% from China. But we also know that US in turn has about a 20% dependency on China for its supply, making China more or less the common denominator in the supply network. Based on this, we believe that Mexico's strategic value in terms of resilience, speed, and flexibility is in a way indirectly proportional to the amount of sourcing coming from China. The more an industry is dependent on supply from China, the less valuable Mexico's resilience becomes. This raises a need for a regional supply network, which is in a way to an extent fulfilled by US at the moment. And so we believe to maximize the resilience in the North American value chain, either Mexico or the US must develop their own upstream. With that, I want to segue into conclusion. And we really want to answer three main questions here. Why Mexico? Where in Mexico and how? As for why, we believe Mexico has a proximity advantage that really is unmatched in the North American market right now. And decades of industry investment, as previously explained, point to a mature cluster in the region. We also know that Mexico is cost competitive, not only due to its labor costs, like Mr. Derry pointed out, but also thanks to its trade agreements and maquiladora system, which also work together and work well to lower costs. And also there seems to be no shortage of technical talent as well for your investment needs. Moving on to where in Mexico, we believe that the border states have an adequate environment in terms of clusters and infrastructure, which is quite similar to infrastructure on the other side of the border as well. The border states in particular also maximize the proximity benefits your supply chain resilience needs as well. Also, we believe among the border states, previous slide, please. Yes. So also we believe among the border states, Baja California stands out due to its diverse cluster specialization, as previously covered, and its close proximity not only to the US, but to China as well. It seems to be the closest state to all these two countries, making it a perfect location for implementing new supply chain strategies. And we believe your success in Baja California could trigger a domino effect across the rest of the border states. So getting into how exactly can we accelerate this movement? Well, based on multiple interviews and discussions we've had with the executives and experts and agencies, the following points could help facilitate that. Starting off with digitization. A sort of networking platform for commercially interested parties would really help existing clusters to grow and prosper, while also helping the industry in the process. Next, collaboration between neighboring clusters across the border. A combined regional effort is sort of going to be more effective for the region in terms of utilizing strengths and weaknesses across the border. And clusters from US and Mexico are likely to complement each other rather than compete. And finally, apart from obvious incentives and benefits that people are looking for with the Mexican government, what was highly requested among our participants was improved information accessibility relating to taxation or duties or regulation. especially now due to the changes coming from the USMCA agreement. Many of our participants desire better accessibility to information through digitization, and also a support for the English language, which is something that we students wholeheartedly support. And with that, I'd like to end the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. Special thanks to Tijuana EDC, Mexicali EDC, Forefront ED for the support in helping us better understand the cross-border region. And also a special thanks to the research participants as well. We truly appreciate you spending time with us, our students, on your busy days. And we're excited and looking forward to the industry and government panel discussion coming up next. So thank you so much.
Is the reason for Mexico not having growth in the integrated circuits because it is a capital-intensive industry versus labor-intensive? And actually, Tom Derry answered the question saying, there are better informed experts at ISEI. I would suggest that if Mexico implemented policies that were favorable to foreign direct investment in capital-intensive industries, it would stand to win market share from other countries who predominate in these industries today. Right? Helen also answered saying, based on Helen's experience, the main reasons could be because of supply clustering, including all electronic components are not located in this region.
My name is Bhavnesh Mathur. I have been going to Mexico for 30 years as part of IBM, Sanmina, and other companies. I'm currently a partner in a private equity firm with a company that we have in Mexicali, Mexico. So I'm currently engaged with Mexico. My experience is that Mexico has great leadership, and you will hear from many of these leaders today. They have matured to develop and deliver complex product and services. We'll talk about that as well. And quite frankly, I think Mexico has survived many challenges and has shown itself to be a very strong country. All the border issues, peso issues, SARS, COVID, and whatever. I find that Mexico normally comes out of these things very strong. So that's my experience. I am a strong proponent of Mexico. I'm very pleased to have 4 people that are far smarter than I am about Mexico to be a part of the panel. I'll ask each one of you to introduce yourself. If you could maybe tell me your current role, what global experience you have, because we know that many of you have worked in and out of Mexico, and finally, the experience that you have in Mexico. So in no particular order, if Javier Valdez, if you're on the phone, perhaps you can give us an introduction, Javier.
Thank you, Vinesh. Javier Valadez here. I am currently Director of Operations for Kenworth in Mexico. In the past, I used to work for Audi, the German car manufacturer, when they decided to build a new greenfield project in Mexico as the first premium auto manufacturer in the country. So this drove a lot of investment of whole supply chains, as you were saying. And I'm glad to be here. I'm responsible for customs, supply chain in Mexico, and mainly regulations and lobbying with the government. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Javier. Felipe, I've heard a lot about you. I'd love to learn more about you if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Very glad to be sharing with you in this panel. Well, I'm 5 years ago, I'm the general manager of the Safran Aerosystems facilities in Chihuahua, Mexico, which is 5 facilities and close to 3,600 employees. Before that, I spent 10 years with Honeywell as vice president of the mechanical division at Honeywell Aerospace. And before of that, I worked in automotive. I worked for Valeo and Toyota Koito. So I spent another 15 years or 12 years in automotive as well, starting several projects and products. And certainly I have a lot of experience both in automotive and aerospace. And this afternoon, I will share some of those experiences and challenges of both industries. Good to be here with you.
Thank you, Felipe. And Eduardo, if you could introduce yourself as well, please.
Sure, thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm Eduardo Salcedo. I'm the Director of Operations for Osher Medical, Latin America. We're in Tijuana, Baja California. It's a good case to examine in terms of the technology that we manage. We have applied and won at some point the best place to work in Mexico. So it conjugates a lot of things that to speak of about the state and the capabilities of Mexico and Baja California together. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Great, thank you. I'd like each one of you to think about how you can demonstrate to the audience here the capability in Mexico, how large some of the things that you do are. You mentioned 3,600 people, talented people, Felipe, and what some of the world-class capability that you have, because as Mexico rises in the clusters, the capability will have to be best in the world. So I'd like each one of you to address it, but Felipe, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Well, Safran in Mexico is the #1 employer of the aerospace industry in Mexico, very close to 12,000 employees. And we have locations in Tijuana, Mexicali, Chihuahua, and Querétaro. And in terms of capabilities, basically we have a big electric wire harnesses and switches and processors, electric processors, electronics, things like that. We also have a big machining capabilities, mainly for engines in Querétaro. We have landing systems as well. We have a big machining and metal capabilities. In my operations, in particular in Chihuahua, we have a lot of composite material, both of carbon-based and fiberglass. We also have lighting and mechanical. We have metal sheeting, forming, basically chemical surface treatment capabilities, sewing, because we do the evacuation systems for in one of our plants. We have a lot of sewing as well there. So it's a very diverse, let's say, capabilities, but certainly all our facilities are world-class. And as I mentioned, Safran is the #2 tier 1 supplier in the world for aerospace industry.
Yeah, that's good to know. I don't think people always get an appreciation for the depth of capability and how large capability you have. Eduardo, when you and I spoke, I know in your business there's a lot of capability in Mexico as well. Please share that with us.
Yeah, very quickly. Osher Medical is a medical device company that manufactures mostly orthopedic devices, but also has prosthetics, active and passive prosthetics, meaning biorobotics, doing most of the components in Mexico. We also share, as my partner just mentioned, a diversity of processes and technology under one roof. In this Mexico facility is the largest facility that Osher has worldwide. Osher is #1 to #4 in every single segment market that we participate on. And it goes from sewing to powder coating to cutting metal with laser beam to metal stamping, vertical injection molding, regular injection molding, pad printing, silkscreen printing, and I can go on and on and on and on. I call it the perfect playground for an engineer. The facility, because any type of manufacturing technology, well, I found one that I didn't find in 25 years in the medical device industry, that I find it for the first time in Osher. It's a laser cutter of textile. And I said, why the hell do you need a laser beam to cut textile, for God's sake? So it's a universal. This is like, I'm pulling the brand here, but why? Because it's such an intricate design that you have to cut in the textile, and you have to cauterize to make sure that you have no threads left. And that just to give you a sense of the diversity that you can find under one roof. It's a 300,000 square feet operation that we have in Tijuana.
Excellent. From aerospace to medical. Sergio, I'd like to go to you. You work for a brand that everyone knows, but maybe you can describe what you do and how significant the facility is.
Hi, Sergio Langarica. I work for Sony Electronics. I'm based out of San Diego, but I'm responsible for the Americas region. from Canada down to Argentina. I deal with trade strategy and compliance. So I deal with tariffs, trade, free trade agreements, manufacturing incentive programs. And I've had the opportunity to help set up free trade zones in the US, Maquila programs in Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador as examples of countries that we deal with in the region. Our current manufacturing in Mexico right now is third party, where Foxconn purchased our factory. And actually Foxconn has purchased a lot of electronics and IT companies' factories in Mexico. But we've been in Mexico since the 80s. And at one point we had up to 4 factories. Right now we have all of our televisions, or the majority of our televisions, sold in the Americas come from Tijuana at this point in time. And from Tijuana, we export predominantly to the US and Canada, but also to Central and South America, and even exporting to Brazil and Argentina, where we also have manufacturing facilities for those products. So Mexico is an important hub for the entire Americas region. It's a regional factory, and it's well suited because our North American headquarters is here in San Diego.
Great. Thank you, Sergio. Let's move on to you, Javier. You work for Kenworth, completely different industry as well. Tell us more about your unique capabilities.
Definitely. So what we found in Mexico, it's a country that graduates more than 115,000 engineers every year. That's more than double on the number of engineers that graduates in Germany. So this speaks about the capabilities that we can find in Mexico. So we have a big factory in Mexicali, one of our 10 factories around the world, where we make heavy duty trucks. So to give this some context, Mexico is the #1 exporter of heavy duty trucks in the whole world. And with this in mind, we have a big factory in Mexicali that gives employment to 3,400 people in the bordering region of Baja California, next to California. And well, what we do there is many of the processes all the way down from molding up to setting up the engines, and then having this special customization that heavy duty trucks industry requires. So we export to the US and Canada. I would say 60% of our product mix goes up to the US and Canada, and perhaps 20% goes to Central and South America, and the rest remains in the country.
Excellent, thank you. I wanted to next ask you all about, what did you do when you were starting your business and you found certain capability was missing? I didn't have a chemical supplier or a metal supplier or a harness supplier or whatever that happened to be. Felipe, how did you find people to fill the gaps that you could not fill? Did you bring in other companies? Did you make your own, or how did you do that?
Yeah, I'm gonna share some experience in both in my time in Honeywell and now with Safran. There are some capabilities that there are no existence in Mexico. In the previous presentation, you showed the pyramid where the top is US and the bottom is US and China. And that's some of the problem, especially for aerospace. For example, automotive follow a completely different strategy than aerospace. Automotive, you know, when Ford, GM, Toyota, whoever moves into Mexico, they move at least the critical supply chain with them. Either, you know, Mexican companies, joint venture, or foreign companies that open a satellite facility in Mexico. That was the strategy of supply chain. And as a result, today, the cars made in Mexico have 45 content of Mexican component. Aerospace was a completely different strategy. They didn't move the supply chain. So a situation that we have today is that less than 4% of the content of the different products that we produce in Mexico in aerospace are Mexican content. That means 96% are imported components or foreign components. Most of them from US, some of them from China, as you well presented in the previous presentation. And that is a challenge, because a big difference as well is that the aerospace industry is heavily regulated and focused in product and certification. The automotive is heavily focused in processes and is also regulated, but not as much as aerospace. So therefore, to bring new supplies and new suppliers into the supply chain take time and money. Mm-hmm. So in some cases, I'm gonna give you some examples, for example, engineering castings. Engineering casting, there's no availability in Mexico. You are forced to import it from US. So there's practically nobody in Mexico is doing that process capability. And therefore, you need to start really in aerospace in order to expand your supply base. You need to really engage into a supplier development program where you teach the suppliers that have the technical capabilities. You teach them how to do business in aerospace, which kind of regulations and certification they need to go. And normally what in an automotive takes you 2 or 3 months of certification, in aerospace, you are talking 1 to 2 years. So that's important to understand and how to do business in aerospace, as well as, to do the proper preparation, not only the technical side, also in the management side.
Right. Thank you. That's very helpful. Sergio, is that the way it is in your business, the electronics business, or are there more local suppliers? Are you 4% Mexico content or higher than that?
The content is relatively low. The raw materials or basic ingredients, resistors, capacitors, bare boards, all come from Asia. Many years ago, the strategy was go to Asia and bring the supply chain from Asia to the region. There's always a lot of resistance with regards to just, a capacitor resistor, it's 0.0001 cent. And I mean, they're commodities, basically. They don't have a brand. And so we didn't meet success, we met resistance, actually. Plastics, injection molding, metal parts, processes such as those, we were successful in bringing them locally. But what is, if you look at electronics, the main component is always going to be the motherboard or the main board. So Mexico in the electronics sector has predominantly focused on mounting the electronics as opposed to making the ingredients, which are resistors, capacitors, ICs. There was one initiative years ago called Silicon Border in Mexicali, where the objective, especially taking into consideration the security concerns that were mentioned in the presentation earlier, was, can we bring semiconductor manufacturing because of security regions to the region? Those are multi-billion-dollar investments. There's some of those in the US, but there's a strong concentration in countries like Taiwan and Japan, Korea, and now China. And right now it's a really hot topic. And there's not enough. And the question is, can still Mexico bring those ICs? Because that's where a lot of the value in the electronics products exists. So that's a great opportunity for Mexico is with regards to that. But we don't have that yet. That's a big challenge. So we still have a strong reliance predominantly on Asia for the basic components that we produce, and we've not been successful in bringing them. And the question was, should you bother? They're commodities, they're very inexpensive, and in a world of free trade and globalization, it wasn't a security concern, so we stopped asking for that to happen as a country. It's back on the table. Should we be considering? Because even before all of that moved to Asia, much of that was produced in the US. But it went from the US to Asia, and it hasn't come back. The question is, in this new environment, will it start to come back?
Yeah, we have definitely seen the US government do some regulations that is bringing the printer circuit board industry back to the US and really back to North America, because of security concerns and continuity of supply and other things. So maybe not ICs, but in the electronics business, if the board comes back, that would solve some of the problems, and that doesn't take as much capital to do as it possibly IC. I want to ask Eduardo and Javier, because Felipe and everyone has mentioned this. What do you feel about the talent in Mexico? Lots of engineers graduating. Javier, you talked about that. How is that working out? Are these engineers able to find jobs? Are they trained? Are they ready to join the workforce, or do they have to be trained after they join the workforce?
I would say what we found in Mexico is with this large number of engineers graduating, we've seen that not only it is a matter of clusterization by industries, but also by methodologies. So we've identified in Mexico how some regions have specialized in American supply chains, Japanese supply chains, German supply chains. And it was really interesting the work that Abhinav, Nora, and Nikki did, because I could see those regions within those maps that they were showing. So what has become very useful for us is there have been some initiatives that started first by the own company's interest, but then adopted by chambers and business associations, where they have implemented a dual education system that sort of standardizes the level of apprentice or the level of quality of the work of these engineers, so that there might be Kenworth, or there might be Volkswagen or Sony coming to Mexico and then giving them employment. So this has been the way that these engineers have got an open door to this company. So I would say this has been a very useful initiative, so that we can actually tailor-made these recently fresh graduated engineers into our industries and into our specific supply chains. Maybe Eduardo can complement on that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Excellent.
most
Thank
definitely. Yeah. Just to agree with Javier, basically from the manufacturing end, we've seen that joining forces with the academia, with the local universities, to shaping and creating curricula for the different careers have helped a lot. We're starting to see the fruits of the first generations of biomedical engineering, things to that effect that we didn't have in the past, or at least not as accessible as we do right now. And the other thing is that we have proven the capability to tackle any type of technology, and the diversity of challenges that we have been faced with in terms of adapting production processes is second to none. And I always say, this is my personal take on it, but Tijuana and Baja California is a pretty good example, difficult to replicate in any part of the world, of the diversity of foreign investment that you have. I literally drive on my way from my home to my facility through Japanese, Chinese, French, German, you name it, Mexican, corporate operations and different brands and household names that are right here. What does that have to do with anything? Well, the fact that when I hire somebody from the street or an engineer has been exposed to every single way of thinking about manufacturing. They say, oh, I worked for 2 years for a German company that used to do it this way. And then I move on to Mitsubishi and work for the Japanese for another 2 years, and they used to go about it this way. And so it doesn't stop there. I personally think that also evolves in a person. You cannot help it. One trait that you cannot buy or teach in a university, and that is adaptability. They come to the facility and they're ready to absorb no matter what complexity of technology you throw at them. As long as you provide the right tools and the proper training and education, they'll grasp it immediately. And we have that experience. Just to close my comment, for instance, one of the most advanced technological tools that we have in the facility is 7-axis CNC DMU type of cutters that you don't rarely see in the aerospace industry or any other place. And they're being run, they're $1 million a pop. We have 9 of them. And we have Tijuana 20-year-olds running them. So when I get visit from the MIT or people from different universities, they always pull me to the side, and the question is the same. They say, where did you find somebody to run this type of toy? And I really get the joy of saying, oh, he was walking down the street and I pulled him in. I just provide him training for 3 to 6 months with the Japanese and the German designers of this machine. And now they're suggesting how to improve upon the programs that they use to cut off time and to improve cycle time. So, and that's a fact. So the capabilities and the access to qualified hand is proven. It's something that we're beyond questioning.
Yeah, that's an excellent comment. I want to ask you all to answer one last question that I think our time will be up, but you may have answered it, Eduardo, so I'll maybe go back to Philippe and ask him. I think a lot of people today in the world are thinking about Mexico. A lot of people in the US are thinking about Mexico. And if you were to tell somebody that is thinking about moving their supply chain out of the world and into Mexico for the future, Philippe, what is the one thing that you think will be the strength of Mexico in the future as more companies come to Mexico and try to take advantage of everything that's in Mexico? What's the one thing that Mexico will be known for in the next 3 to 5 years that makes it strong?
Yeah, I think, also in the previous presentation, some of the panelists show that. I think there are some obvious things. One is the logistics, location.
Sure, yeah,
Certainly we are in North America. We just signed again the USMCA free trade agreement, or the new NAFTA. Certainly what the other panelists mentioned about the very capable technical people available. Any kind of operation with any level of technical complexity, Mexico has the technical engineers and people let's basically used to work in that level of complexity. Relatively easy to do business. Certainly certain promotion setups like the Maquila setup, to facilitate and be in an environment of duty-free, let's say, kind of environment in order to manufacture in Mexico, export to North America and mainly US. I think those are the obvious strengths. That's obvious. Certainly, we have the challenge to develop much further the supply chain. The current suppliers that we have are very small, are not ready to do the jump from be a small company into medium and big company. In Mexico has no very strong financial sector to promote investment, especially industrial development investment. Is very limited if you compare with what tools, let's say financial tools, do you have in US, and you compare with Mexico. And certainly you mentioned that you are in an equity firm, so you should know about it. When you compare what is available in Mexico versus US in terms of financial tools, that's a big gap, let's say. So small companies, small industrial companies that may be very good, technically speaking, they don't have the tools to develop further, to move from be a small company to a medium company, and to start supplying OEMs and tier ones, either in automotive or aerospace, because it requires a lot more finance and a lot more complexity management. Certainly that's, in my opinion, the main weakness. The supply base need support, need development, and certainly the financial side, in my opinion, and the management side to move from small to medium and to be able to manage that complexity. That's the main challenge for the supply base in Mexico.
Yeah, well said. And I think that certainly speaks to partnership between the industrial sector, the businesses that you all represent, and the government sector, and working together, because those other companies have accomplished that by the government working with the industry and doing all the things that need to be done. So thank you for sharing that, Philippe. Sergio, what about you? What do you think is the advantage of coming to Mexico for businesses that are thinking of coming to Mexico in the next 3 to 5 years? What will that advantage be for that company?
Well, obviously we have the Maquila program and we have the free trade agreement. So those we already have, proximity we already have, but we're starting to see more R&D being done in Mexico. And I've seen Mexican companies starting to do engineering design. So Mexico's moving up the value stream, not just manufacturing, but now doing design. But Mexico has also put a very large focus on software. Right? Now the 4th largest exporter of software to the world, and that's key, especially in the world of automation.
Yeah.
So that is a huge advantage that we're starting to see that will have spillover effects, within Mexico. Many large companies, Hewlett Packard, IBM in the Guadalajara area, have thousands of engineers now focused on basically writing code, and that's very significant. So it's not just the manufacturing; it's also the software. And Mexico's also grown tremendously with regards to business process outsourcing. So contact centers, call centers, and services. So in addition to just making the products, we're doing more of the activities, and the proximity with regards to culture and the language helps us tremendously in order to perform those other services. And having that level of complexity in Mexico makes that Mexico that much more attractive. My comments.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you very much. How about Javier, your comment?
Thank you, Ganesh. And building on Sergio's comment, I would say from my perspective, there are 5 factors that give competitiveness to Mexican supply chains, and Mexico has evolved through all of them: cost, quality, speed, flexibility, and reliability. I think Mexico has been evolving through all of them. And we've seen how during the pandemic, how reliable is this North American supply chain and how important it is. As Tom was saying during his presentation, reliability is becoming a key factor for supply chains. What I would add a 6th one, which is the ability to learn and as more artificial intelligence becomes a decisive factor in integrated supply chains, Mexico will continue to add value to supply chains and will continue to be an important destination for consolidating regional supply chains, in this case, North American ones.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Helen says I've got a few more minutes, so I kind of wanted you to think about one other thing. A question that I run into personally, and we talked about this on our pre-call, is I'm new to Mexico and all of this capability is everywhere in Mexico, but I don't know where to go. If I was to call you and said, I need a plating solution, I need to build some castings, I need to do some injection molding. When you were asking those questions, maybe I start with you, Eduardo, this time, how did you answer them, and where would you tell somebody to go today to get answers, to get some knowledge and help about Mexico?
Well, several different choices. You can go to the conglomerates or clusters that we have been talking about, depending on the nature of the industry that you're in. We have the Tijuana EDC that is always welcoming the different governmental instances that can help out with that. There's a lot of help available. And the fact that we're operating as a team, because these conglomerates or these clusters didn't just came about because of luck. We were looking for these associations and now cross-cluster or cross-conglomerate to tie the capabilities and the know-how of the different industries to build bridges throughout what could be common ground. It's what's happening right now. So it's getting much easier. Osher, just to close the comment very quickly, started with what we call a shelter structure in which they subcontract the different functions. They grew on the shelter for a couple of years, then became independent. And that was it. The learning process was expedited because of getting that initial support. So several instances to get help.
Great, very helpful, thank you. Philippe.
I just want to mention I was just the former president of the Mexican Federation of Aerospace Industry, and now I'm part of the board and I'm responsible for the supply chain development. So in this case, we work together with the clusters, aerospace clusters in the different regions, and in the FEMIA, we have a formal program for supply development. So here also in the audience is Luis Liscano, Javier Hurtado, part of the team of FEMIA, and we have a formal process, more than 4 years, developing the supply base, because what I mentioned, it's a big challenge for aerospace industry to expand, the supply base in Mexico. That's one of our first priorities.
Got it. Okay, great. Sergio, did you want to comment on this?
I do. I was actually, I'm actually a national board member for the Electronics Industry Association and former regional president here in the Northwestern region in the Baja area. And literally for decades, we've been holding annual supplier conferences where we do matchmaking, right? And now at the national level, we've developed a database which identifies all over the country all of the suppliers that exist, and we do matchmaking. So please reach out. Canieti is the name of the organization, canieti.org, and it's National Electronics, IT, and Telecommunications Industry. And we have huge initiatives that we run, annual programs, in order to foster greater integration.
Okay, great. Thank you. I see we have a couple of questions. I might take one of these as our last question of the day, and then I will come back and talk about April 28th, because I think we can continue this discussion for longer and in more detail. But the question here is from Ozzy Diaz from the Techno Shelter. The question is, what is the current perception from your corporate offices about the current federal administration? Meaning, are they still comfortable on bringing more business to Mexico? So who would like to answer the question about the current leadership in Mexico and their friendliness to business?
Don't get me going. Don't get me going. So I'm going to pass it on to Javier.
Thank you, Eduardo. I mean, for us, the business is certainly the pandemic has hit all of us, but for Kenworth, the business is thriving. We're committing more investments to the city of Mexicali. We are developing our own supply development programs within the region of Baja and also in California, as we are seeing now this trend of electric vehicles coming in with the Biden administration. And the factory in Mexico is part of this key, I would say, the key objective for the next 4 years of the US and in Mexico for PACCAR, which is our holding. So for us, we're comfortable. We are going on the business. The business is running. Luz Maria de la Mora, who would be joining us after our forum, she's been amazing with us. She's had an open doors policy, and she's become our close ally within the federal Ministry of Economy. So we'll keep it going.
Okay, great. Eduardo and Felipe, let's do Eduardo and then we'll do Felipe. Eduardo, you are
very quickly. We cannot complain during the pandemic impact and any federal administration impact that we might be experiencing. We have been working on 3 transfers, 2 from Iceland and 1 from the US at once. So I'm not a good example to say that, oh, it's hurting us, and really the trust that the corporate office is putting on us is not there, because it contradicts what's going on. But I do defend or would like to say that the more that we do efforts to create a regulatory framework that makes the border invisible, the better we all going to be in terms of trade. And I think that's done with work, with education, with trust, and with demonstrated capabilities. And I think that's the underlying subject that is under all this technical discussion in terms of trade agreements and technology and production processes. It's all about getting to know the capabilities that are on each side of the border, communicating and creating bridges to make that border as invisible as possible in terms of sharing wealth and success. And that's what I would say.
Felipe?
Yeah, I want to mention related to that question. One thing that is gotta be clear for all of us is that the rules of engagement have not changed. In other words, the current administration, the current federal administration, was the one that signed the USMCA trade agreement. That means that it's committed to continue with the free trade, with the open investment, and certainly the rules have not changed drastically, let's say, or significantly for all of our companies. And I think I'm speaking for all of the panelists. Of course, one key element of trust is that we work in a real democracy. In other words, in real democracy, we get used to have different opinions and extreme opinions, some cases, and the change of government is smooth, and that's what we expect in a democracy. We just saw it in US with Trump and Biden. We just saw it in the most, let's say, strong democracy of the world. So Mexico is no different. If, of course, we have a previous government from the right, and now we have one of the left, but the rules of engagement and the overall policies have not changed significantly. So I think in that regard, that provides a very high level of confidence. And certainly we all prefer to work in a democratic country where the democracy brings the different scopes and the different visions into the government, and that's normal in a democracy.
Completely agree. Sergio, any last comments before I close this out?
We've been operating in Mexico for decades, and the Maquila program goes through the 60s, and we saw the students present a timeline from the 20s. We're in for the long term. So regardless of the short-term noise that we can hear, the reality is that there's significant investment, there's a lot of employment, and Mexico gains from this. So the long-term view is that we're committed, and we're here to grow, and we're showing tremendous success, and there's tremendous opportunity, right? And if the pandemic has shown us something, is that we have more demand. I mean, in the electronics industry sector, actually, our demand has risen. Production in Mexico is increasing. So it's like the goose with the golden eggs, right? Yeah. You got to take care of it. And if you ruin that, then it's short term, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think at the end of the day, we're all going to be sensible. We're going to voice our opinions, and then we're going to do what's best for the country. So I don't really think that it's it's an issue that's going to affect us in the long term. We're still investing, we're still growing, we're becoming more sophisticated, and I don't think that's going to end. My comments.
I agree with what all of you have said. As I said at the beginning, I think Mexico is mature. I think it's a survivor country. Lots of issues have come and gone, and they're gone. So that's a good thing, and we can look forward to a brighter future. My last comment before I turn it back over is that we will take this discussion and make it a 3-hour discussion on April 28th. We will plan a webinar, invite all of you to join it. So I hope you found this informative, as informative as I have. I learned a lot, and we'll be getting you out more information so we can learn more from gentlemen like the ones we had. Thank you, panelists. You did a great job. Thank you very much. I really appreciate what you have done here today. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over.
Great. Thank you very much, Banesh. So this panel was the industry panel. Thank you again. And now we are moving on to a government, agency, and academia panel. In this panel, we'll talk about the geopolitical and legislative and economic framework driving investment into US-Mexico cross-border regions, as well as Latin America. We have 3 great panelists ready. Luz Maria de la Mora Sanchez, a Vice Minister of Foreign Trade in the Ministry of Economy, Mexico. Also, Luis Lizcano, CEO of FAMIA, and Kati Suminen, founder and CEO of Next Trade Group. And with that, let's first go over the room to introduce briefly about each panelist. Let's start with Luz Maria. Luz Maria, can you unmute yourself and briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you very much, Hugh. It's great to be here with all of you. My name is Luz Maria de la Mora. I am the Undersecretary of Foreign Trade at the Ministry of Economy of Mexico. Thanks for the invitation.
Great, thank you, Luz Maria. Now next, let's move on to Luis.
Thank you. My name is Luis Vizcano. I'm CEO of FEMIA, the Mexican Federation of Aerospace Company, which is the Mexican Aerospace Industry Association that actually gathers more than 120 companies that are the most important aerospace companies operating in Mexico.
Great, thank you, Luis. Next to you, Kati.
Kati Suominen, I'm the founder and CEO of Next Street Group. We're here in Los Angeles, and we work with governments, multilateral development banks, as well as companies like Google, MasterCard, eBay, and others to enable international trade through technology. And really a pleasure to be back on the panel with my colleague Luz Maria. We were just on a panel last week, so really an honor and pleasure again. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kati. What a small world. So let's start with Luz Maria on the government side question. So the first question is, what's the plan or the goal of the Mexican government building up the economic development as a country? For example, are there any industries of focus for the next 5 years? You are muted, Luz.
Sorry. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you for the opportunity of being here with you, and thank you for the opportunity of sharing with you the goals of the Mexican government in the coming years. Well, let me start by saying that our goal is to make of Mexico a manufacturing powerhouse. We know that we have the infrastructure and we have the knowledge to do it. Let me be very brief about this and share with you that on January 19th, Secretary Cloutier, the Secretary of Economy of Mexico, presented our economic recovery plan. In there, we have identified 4 areas of interest to the Mexican government and that we feel that will help us enable development in Mexico. First, we want to increase local content in sectors where we already have an important stronghold, like, for example, the steel sector, chemicals, the electric and electronic sector, pharmaceuticals, plastic, medical devices, the automotive sector, of course, and the aerospace. The second group of activities have to do with those labor-intensive sectors where we have experienced important challenges as a result of the pandemic, like clothing, apparel, footwear, and services in its most comprehensive definition. A third area has to do with the sectors of the future. We have been working in the Ministry of Economy, even before this administration, in developing innovation and the sectors of the future, such as intelligent manufacturing, robotics, the Internet of Things, and the Industrial Revolution 4.0, big data, cybersecurity, and of course, biomedicine, biohealth, telemedicine, no? And the fourth area has to do with food and agriculture, that even though it may appear as a very traditional sector, which it is at some point, it also incorporates a lot of innovation. So in addition to these 4 main areas in which we are working and paying a lot of attention to it, I also want to mention that we have a commitment in Mexico regarding the regional gap. As a result of NAFTA, which was in place in 1994 and was in place for more than 26 years, Mexico was able to develop a diversity of global supply chains in high complexity sectors. However, these were mostly established in the northern and central regions of Mexico. So today, the government of President López Obrador and in the Ministry of Economy, we recognize there's still work to do in order to foster the inclusion of the southern states of Mexico into global value chains, promote the participation of those states, firms, and obviously groups that have not participated in the formal economy or in international trade. So we are also working very, very hard in the development of infrastructure, but also in identifying the value chains that we can develop in the southern part of the country so that they can integrate into the central and northern part of Mexico and then contribute to a stronger Mexican economy, export platform, and a stronger North America. Thank you.
Thank you, Luz Maria. That's actually quite interesting view from the government side. Now let's move on to this business association side, in particular on the aerospace. For you to Luis, what is your plan or the goal for FAMIA building up the aerospace industry as a business association? Do you have any areas of focus, right, for the next 5 years? Also, in order to implement that plan, do you see any big challenges? Oh, you are muted. Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay. Within the FAMIA, within the association, we are organizing different commissions, which are basically the areas in which we concentrate or focus in order to try to achieve our goals. Definitely, our primary main goal is to continue with the development of our Mexican aerospace industry sector development, which is our main objective. These commissions that we have a competitiveness commission, we have a supply chain development commission, we have a human talent development commission, a maintenance, repair, and overhaul commission, an innovation commission, a space commission, which was newly formed. Basically, those are our areas of expertise. And to be honest, right now, all of the commissions that are formed have one thing in common, which is prepare to be flexible and adapt to the changing conditions. You mentioned about the primary challenges to achieve the goals. The primary challenge that we have right now, that we face, and we're facing every day, this Pandora's box, is the continuously changing environment. Demands are down and up and then down. We have public health challenges, just like we just faced it with the pandemic, trade conditions, situations with design and technological change and obsolescence. So there are many things that we're facing right now. And the first challenge that we need to face is be prepared to be flexible and adapt and keep up with this changing environment. And the second one that I see very more specific is basically is a twofold. Is the supply chain development, consolidate the supply chain, because as the previous panelist explained, we have we need to continue working on increasing the supply chain integration in Mexico, which is not easy, especially in this industry sector, which is very specialized, takes a lot of capital, time, and effort. And the other one is be prepared with human talent development. Luz Maria just mentioned about the new technologies, the new Industry 4.0. We need to not only have the technologies, but have the people to actually be fluent on those technologies and be prepared to utilize those tools in order to compete in the global arena.
Great, thank you very much, Luis. That also reminds me sort of a Darwin's evolutionism, which is the one that survives is not the strongest, it's not the most intelligent one, but the one that adapts to the environment the fast, right? The most receptionist one. That's definitely a valid point. So for you, Kati, you have done some research in particular related to Latin American trade. Luz Maria mentioned this inclusion of the southern Mexico into a global value chain. But when we talk about the whole global value chain, Latin America, to me, is still the one that is not fully integrated yet. Can you talk about that sort of Latin American perspective in trade?
Yeah, we recently did some survey work and research work with the UN Economic Commission for Latin America as well as for Asia, so UN ECLAC and UN ESCAP, looking at how Latin American countries as well as Asian countries are using, and companies, of course, in those countries are using digitally deliverable services to increase value in their production. And of course, Mexico has perfected this. I love how Luz Maria says, well, we're becoming, or we want to become a powerhouse. To me, Mexico is such a great powerhouse, but it also goes to show how Mexico sees that there are new opportunities to upgrade manufacturing processes, for instance, through imported services. And what we found in this work, as we started to look at how companies are increasingly using digitally deliverable services delivered from other parts of the world and included, embedded in their production processes, we found, number one, that of course, when companies do this, it tends to fuel their export competitiveness. So using imported services enables companies to specialize, focus on their core business, and increases their export competitiveness. And Mexico, of course, is at the forefront of this trend, ASEAN economies in Asia as well. Mexican manufacturing out of Latin American countries is already extremely intensive in the use of these digitally deliverable services when we compare to other Latin American countries. But in the agricultural and services sectors, and perhaps in other kind of subsectors, perhaps mining here and there and others, Mexico still mostly uses domestic services as inputs. Now, this is not necessarily bad if those domestic services are good, but there's also opportunities to tap into international digitally deliverable services. I would say, as I listened to the prior panel, is that Mexico may have a great opportunity here also to increase the exports of digitally deliverable services, since you are perfecting, after all, the use of these kinds of services in manufacturing in Mexico. And one of the great cases that we saw during this work was Softec, the Mexican tech company that worked a great deal with US companies in Mexico and now is serving Indian companies and Chinese companies in Asia, doing the same, enabling them to upgrade their production. So that's what we see. Mexico is very integrated already in use of digitally deliverable services. We also, in some other work recently that we discussed with Luz Maria and others a couple of weeks ago, so that Mexican manufacturers are also using e-commerce already. They are selling and buying goods and services online electronically increasingly. So 20 to 30% of manufacturing firms are using e-commerce, perhaps for 25% to 30% of their sales as well as purchases. So any way which you look at this, the flows that are in Mexican manufacturing sector are increasingly digitized, whether it's companies selling and buying goods and services or integrating these services in their value chains. A lot of opportunity there perhaps to export and create new flexibilities.
Great, thank you very much, Kari. Now I'll get back to Luz Maria, but before that, I just want to share a few polling results that we did and then get back to you, Luz Maria, about challenges and the opportunities. So if we see, let's say, the first result of our polling from in regards to the value supply chains, which country do you think will be the primary competitor of Mexico in the short to midterm in 3 to 7 years? So it's, first of all, it was, most people mentioned that it's East Asian countries such as Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, potentially. And the second one was China, and the next India, and then followed by Latin America. That was, first of all, in terms of competitors of Mexico. So this can then relate to what can be the challenges, right? And let me stop sharing the results. And then let me move on to the next question, which was which industry do you think recovered the fastest from the impact of COVID? Not surprisingly, medical came first. Electronics also did pretty well. Automobile still catching up, I believe, and some others, right? And then the last one. So in terms of technology transformation, Here's the result, in particular in the automobile industry, including autonomous driving and electric cars. Now here we are talking about innovation. When that will actually impact the value supply chain on this automobile industry ecosystem. It's actually good to see that most people think it's mostly short term. It's imminent, right? It's within 5 years, it will actually impact the whole ecosystem of automobile industry. So now with that related to this, competitors and also this imminent change, the challenge of innovation and technologies. So back to you, Luz Maria. You mentioned those 4, economic development plans of Mexican government. What do you think are the primary challenges, and also what could be the biggest opportunities here, in particular related to value chains, leveraging the location of North America?
Sure. Thank you, Hugh. Well, let me start by saying that I think it's important to bear in mind always that we, Mexico, the US, and Canada together produce together to compete globally. Since NAFTA entered into force in 1994 and now USMCA in place since 2000, we have developed regional supply chains in strategic sectors such as the automotive sector, electronics, industrial machinery. USMCA, we think, offers a unique opportunity to maintain our competitiveness and integration in North America within a modern framework to develop new regional value chains and also enhance those already in place. Let me start by saying that we offer unique advantages. I think that they have already been discussed in previous panels, but let me just be very brief and say that some of the key advantages of Mexico in regional supply chains have to do with, we have the same time zone, we speak English, we have a young population. Our average age is 29 years old. That's the average age of our population. Every year we graduate more engineers than other emerging economies like India or Vietnam, for example. We also have an open economy. We have 14 free trade agreements with 30 countries. We have an independent central bank, and I can go on with that. We have also, this is a point that I really want to make, in this administration, we have made very strong efforts in terms of increasing the minimum wage. We have increased the minimum wage by more than 30% in 3 years with no effects on inflation. And this is a way in which we are fighting against poverty. We are trying to reduce the income gap, and we are working to build a middle class, which I think is also very important for the purpose of having a domestic market, and a domestic market that can also contribute to a regional market. The second point that I want to make is that we are today we are the US second largest trading partner. And we have a participation in US total trade of 14.3% only after China. We are the second export market to the US. We are the second supplier to the US. So this also tells us a lot about the kind of relationship that we have been able to grow, to build in North America. And in the context of this economic downturn caused by the pandemic, we have been able to develop joint strategies with our partners in the US and Canada. For example, when we had this lockdown of essential activities and industries in the 3 countries, we were able to discuss ways of realigning this definition of essential activities. And my last point has to do with the executive order that President Biden just issued in February. The opportunity that we have to be part of that new strategy of strengthening and building resilient supply chains in the US and in North America, for example, in products like batteries, semiconductors, minerals, and pharmaceuticals, is a good starting point. But as allies, we will have the opportunity to work with the US and with Canada in creating these regional value chains with a regional perspective that will build those resilient supply chain and value chains in North America and allow us to remain competitive in the region. So the current Biden administration is also opening opportunities to strengthen these global supply chains, and for Mexico to be part of that effort. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Luz Maria. Actually, I'm glad that you also covered sort of the impact of COVID-19 at the same time. That was great. Now to you, Luis, again, the similar question about what can be the opportunities, in particular as in the aerospace industries in Mexico. If you can actually address that question, that'll be great. In addition, if you can also address the question about the COVID-19 in the sense that now it's been a year now. What do you think about the future? If there were any changes because of the COVID-19, I am sure some will be gone and some will stay. What do you think about the future of those changes after COVID? Again, you're muted.
Okay. First of all, I'm a little bit shocked to see the results of which industry sector will be recovered first. And aerospace, nobody voted for aerospace. I don't know why. No, actually, you know, our industry sector was severely hit by the pandemic. We definitely have you know, decrease in the demand, very heavy, in some cases even up to 60% in some programs. So, you know, it was very, we took a severe hit as an industry, you know, and being part of this global industry, Mexico being part of this global industry, you know, we were not the exception. So, but also, you know, this situation brought things like, you know, and they mentioned already about the big trend of reshoring, of region, being regional rather than global, and you know, and try to avoid single sourcing. In our sector is somehow difficult because, you know, in some cases you cannot avoid single sourcing because of low volumes that our sector has. But you know, where it can be done, you know, there's a trend, undisputable trend that the buyers, the company, the OEMs, and the tier ones are actually looking for reshape or restructure their supply chain structures. Okay, so I think that's one big opportunity that we have. Although we, with a word of caution for Mexico, you know, it's not that we're gonna lay back and wait for the reshoring, because since this industry is being is global, you know, the reshoring actually can it doesn't necessarily mean that you know, a geographic location makes difference because of the volumes that we handle. So we have to compete again, you know, we have to compete. So we need to do our homework. That's one of the opportunities. Another one, definitely, I think with the ratification of the USMCA, I think, you know, the three governments, Mexico, United States, and Canada, did a great job in recommit on this, and I think this is definitely gonna pose very interesting opportunities for the three countries and for the region together. So I think that's another big opportunity. As for the industry, of course, you know, we did receive a severe hit, but also we are a very resilient industry. In past crises, you know, we have been also very damaged, and we came back. You know, the trend came back. So we are very certain that we're gonna resume our pace of growth, and Mexico definitely will be part of that growth as well. As for the changes that we have been observing recently due to COVID, the way we travel, the way we conduct business, everything is changing right now. The way we live, as a matter of fact. So again, we need to be prepared and adapt quickly, be flexible and adapt quickly. For example, aerospace industry, usually we think about commercial aviation, okay? But there are some other subsectors, for example, space. There are no COVID on space, and there's a big boom that is just starting to develop right now within the what it is called the new space. Okay, so why not taking advantage of that? We are right now working very actively with Mexico's government through the Mexican Space Agency to take advantage of this new trend as well. So, we need to be flexible and adapt quickly. That's the main lesson learned from these pandemics, is that you gotta be flexible, adapt, and move on.
Great point. It's also a very interesting point that no coronavirus in the space, right? That's a good point. So to you, Kati, I know that you mentioned this digital services trade. Definitely that has been impacted by COVID-19 as well. What do you see, what's coming after COVID in those digital services trade?
Well, I guess that trend was already quite kind of vibrant and ongoing, thanks to broadband, thanks to cloud computing. And now it's only accentuating, I'm sure, perhaps some of the challenges that come, not for Latin America as much, because Latin American countries and Mexico are very open to digitally deliverable services. But for market access to other markets like China, there are some challenges there. But I can see this trend only continuing. Over the past 15 years, the digitally deliverable services trade has grown by 4 times in world trade, whereas services have doubled. So almost half of all services are now digitally deliverable, and that will only grow. In terms of some of the opportunities, going back to your question about the kind of southern states and the regional disparities, we did some work recently with USAID looking at how Mexican firms are adjusting to COVID, even the smaller firms, and we discovered that over 70% of firms want to invest more in e-commerce as a result of COVID. They have really had this awakening. Of course, they were already en route, but now in particular, and they want to invest in particular. If you ask them about their priorities to invest, they want to invest in digital capabilities, digital marketing, and e-commerce capabilities. Much more so than other things in their businesses. These are really the top priorities now for firms, including the southern states. And we see that Mexico has wonderful kind of services, digital services that have been growing, fintech services, logistics services, and others that can be provided from distance, even for the southern states, the more rural populations. If we just build trust in these services and enable people to understand how they can benefit from those services for their businesses. So there's some opportunities there, and certainly then USMCA opens other opportunities to integrate more these digital value chains and create kind of digitally more integrated North American market. It is already, but some of the provisions like free transfer of data, safe harbors for internet platforms, consumer protection, things like that, where the 3 markets can align, I think will be a further enabler for Mexico and US to integrate their value chains.
Great point, Kati. And thank you again to all of you, Luz Maria, Luis, and Kati. And my apologies for this short time. My hope is we will have another one like Bob Nash mentioned in April for much longer. And I'm looking forward to having all of you in that. Also, even more looking forward, we will have more events in the fall as well as next year, but in person. So I'm looking forward to actually meeting you in person at that time. With that, again, thank you very much.